It's also okay not to love every minute of it. I thought if I wasn't loving every minute that I was doing something wrong, and you're not. Some parts of parenting are a slog. Some parts of breastfeeding are a slog. So it's okay to, look at that and know there are hard parts and celebrate the parts that are blissful and know that just all of parenting is that way. The whole run of it is just a mix of the good and the bad.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. If you are feeling overwhelmed and unsure of where to turn to for evidence-based education around your pregnancy and birth, maybe you've just found out that you're pregnant and you don't really even know where to start. Maybe you're well into your pregnancy and you're starting to have questions, but you're having a hard time understanding what is honest, data-driven, science-backed education versus what is just viral and circulating on the internet. Then I want to introduce you to the Birth Lounge app. This is an app that is designed to put the control back in your hands no matter where you are in pregnancy. It's available for iPhone and Android, so head to your respective app stores and type in the Birth Lounge app, and you'll be able to download the app directly to your phone and access it anytime. So one of my favorite features is the week-by-week update of fetal development. And you know me, I'm not going to be comparing your baby to the size of a lime or an apple or a cantaloupe or something. No, I want you to actually know what's going on. When I say data-driven, I mean it. I want you to know, hey, this week you're growing kidneys. And hey, guess what? This week you're working on them ears, baby. I want you to know exactly what your baby is doing inside of your belly so that you can stay informed, so that you know no matter where you are in pregnancy, you are the decision maker. You have free will and autonomy, and you have access to data that will help you make the best decisions for you and your family. In addition to that week-by-week update of what your baby's actually going through, you're also going to find pregnancy and postpartum evidence-based articles. Now, these are going to tackle your most common questions. Should I really get tested for GBS? Why do we test for gestational diabetes? What is the science behind hiring a doula? Do I really need to write a birth plan? What is the best position to birth my baby in order to reduce my push times and decrease tearing? What are the newborn procedures that I should expect after my baby is born? How much should my baby be eating? How do I establish good breastfeeding? What about newborn sleep? Help, the umbilical cord fell off. OMG, I'm still bleeding and I don't know if this blood clot is too big. All of it is inside of the Birth Lounge. Not only do you get those evidence-based articles, but I link all of the data for you so that you can click on it. It's clickable links. I want you to be able to access the data that I'm talking about. You can just rely on me to synthesize it, but I'm still going to give you the resources that I'm sharing with you. And in addition to that, at the end of every single article, there are questions broken down that you can take back to your provider to ask them so that you can truly have this collaborative collaborative, respectful communication with them to make sure that not only are you getting evidence-based medical care, but that you're really building this really respectful, collaborative relationship and getting individualized care from your healthcare team. Head to your app store, whether you have an iPhone or an Android, and download the Birth Lounge app. I promise you, it's going to be such a game changer. All right, y'all, did you know that the AAP, or the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, recommend that infants are exclusively breastfed for about the first 6 months of life? And they also both recommend continuing breastfeeding while introducing complementary foods for up to 2 years of age or older. According to our 2022 statistics, that only 86, a little bit less than actually, 85.7% of all infants born in 2022 were ever breastfed. Just 62% were still being breastfed at 6 months, and 40% were being breastfed at 1 year. These rates are not awesome. They're just really not. And there's a lot of things that go into that. So if you're someone who didn't breastfeed your baby until that first 6 month mark or through that first year, I don't want you to feel bad. This certainly isn't about shaming parents. It's more so about highlighting how our system and our country fails us in being able to achieve these goals. So they say breastfeed through 6 months, breastfeed through 1 year. Yet when we look around for the village of how are we actually going to achieve this, it is straight up crickets. Not only that, but where you live in the US completely dictates how much support that you have. Now, if you're out west, you've got actually pretty decent support, but if you're in the South, it is almost non-existent at all. And then we know things like racial disparities and straight up racism from the system also impact things, showing that fewer non-Hispanic and Black infants get breastfed ever. Plus, infants receiving WIC or supplemental nutritional programs, they actually have less breastfeeding rates as well. In addition to that, the age in which you have your baby also influences things. So mothers who are aged 20 to 29 are less likely to breastfeed than mothers who are aged 30 or older. Again, when you think about the resources that are available to these different populations, I think it becomes very clear why breastfeeding throughout that first year can feel, well, just downright impossible. A lot of factors go into this and influence the reason that a lot of moms stop breastfeeding. Issues with lactation and latching, painful latching, concerns about infant nutrition and their weight, unsupportive work policies and lack of parental leave, cultural norms and lack of family support, and then just straight up unsupportive hospital policies and practices that would rather push formula than actually provide you with evidence-based, data-driven breastfeeding support. Heck, we even have hospitals across our country that don't even have lactation support on hand. That just is insane to me. So in true HeHe fashion, when I find a problem, I gotta bring you the answer. So in today's episode, I'm super excited to be able to sit down with Kelly Kendall, who is a RN and an IBCLC, which is an international board certified lactation consultant. And we are going to be diving into how do you actually set yourself up for the longevity of breastfeeding through that first year, if that is your goal. Kelly is the founder of The Balanced Boob and the creator of Boob School, a comprehensive online breastfeeding program for new and expecting parents. She has over a decade of experience in nursing and lactation consulting, to which she blends evidence-based guidance and humor and compassion with helping parents feel prepared, confident, and supported as they navigate feeding their babies. One of my favorite things about Kelly is her passion, but more so is how accessible she makes lactation education in a truly judgment-free zone. In today's episode, we're going to talk about all the things you need to know, like common myths and misconceptions about breastfeeding that we wish all parents knew before birth. How can you actually prepare for breastfeeding before your baby arrives? And what are some of the most overlooked items and resources to help you establish a strong breastfeeding foundation in those early weeks? Because we actually know that those early weeks do determine, or at least highly influence, the longevity of your breastfeeding relationship. I'm also going to ask Kelly about things like low supply and evidence based strategies to increase your milk supply. And primarily, how do you do that without turning to or relying on supplements? And then we're going to dive into things like shallow latch, different positions for breastfeeding your baby, pumping, your baby's weight gain, and how do you actually time an actual feed. Some people say it's from the beginning of the feed. Some people say it's from the end of the feed. What do we need to know about that? And does it actually truly matter? These are the biggest questions facing new moms today when it comes to nursing your baby, along with obviously those emotional and mental health challenges, which Kelly and I are also going to dive into. I want you to have the breastfeeding relationship that you want to have. And you know what? I know that we live in a country that doesn't do an awesome job of supporting that. So I'm going to bring the support to you. This episode is going to be absolutely pivotal in your breastfeeding success. So buckle up, grab a pen and paper, and honestly, get ready to dive into information that you probably have never heard of, but is going to be a complete game changer. So without further ado, Kelly, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You have no idea how excited I am to have you because obviously breastfeeding is something that is on all of our minds. There are so many women out there, not all, but most, who really desire to have a breastfeeding relationship after birth. They really want to nurse their baby. However, in the US, we know this is really hard to achieve. And for such a developed nation, we actually have pretty bad and embarrassing breastfeeding stats. They're bad overall. They're even worse for Black and brown women. And it is just a really hard thing to accomplish because our country doesn't prioritize it. I mean, we don't give lactation support. We don't give maternity leave so that people can actually establish this. Not all of our hospitals have lactation support. It's like all the little easy things that we could do to actually set women up to be able to successfully nurse their babies. It's like our country just goes, we don't really want to, so we're not gonna. And so I'm so excited to have you here. I want to help people understand if you want to breastfeed your baby, you absolutely can. It may take a little grit and a little elbow grease and a little commitment that maybe you do not see coming your way. Complications are very normal. There are gonna be road bumps. There are gonna be nights where you are crying, saying, like, am I making the right choice? And if you want to keep going, that support is absolutely out there. So I think a really great place for us to start is of something that I hear kind of all the time. It's like, you don't know what it's going to be like until your baby is here. Like, you don't know if your baby's even going to be able to nurse. Like, you have no idea what your breast milk supply is going to be. And while all those are true, I am a staunch believer that there are certainly things that we can do to prepare ourselves to breastfeed. What is your opinion on that? And if that's true, what are some things that we can actually do prenatally to maybe sway the cards in our favor to be able to breastfeed our baby once they are here?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And absolutely, there are so many things you can do to help reach your breastfeeding goals. And I think part of what you kind of touched on is knowing what you're up against and the reality of how challenging it is, especially if you're giving birth in a hospital, how quick and intense that period of time is for both you and your baby, and that there's so much happening that even, I hear a lot of moms say, but they have lactation support at the hospital. And I worked as a hospital-based IBCLC for years and a postpartum nurse. And the reality is, two things are very true. You are not primed for taking in a lot of new information after birth. You are just exhausted and you are there to be present with that new baby. And that is not the time to learn new information.
Mm.
So, number one, just your brain is not in the best place to intake things. And number two is, we're doing a lot of things to your sweet little newborn, for even something like an assessment is stressful or the first bath. And when you're giving birth in a hospital, those things can be condensed into a short period of time. A lot of times moms are in and out in 24 hours. And so babies can be really, really sleepy as a result of that and as a result of just the labor process. And so, what I found more than anything else is just parents aren't told how to take advantage of those first hours. And those first hours and first days have a lot of impact on your milk supply over the whole course of your journey. So you may have your baby come out and they are just a little bit of a wet noodle for hours to days. And so we don't want to just ride that out and, be kind of slapping our boob in our baby's face while they're passed out. We want to know, okay, what do I need to do right now to take advantage of this window so I can set up my milk supply for the whole course of my breastfeeding? And that's really what I want people to understand is there are things that you can do in pregnancy that can help support your milk supply. And low supply or perceived low supply is one of the biggest barriers for people to continue breastfeeding. So if we can just work to sort of eliminate that, or we're never going to totally eliminate it, it's very complicated, but stack the cards in our favor the best we can, then it can make a huge difference for people.
So, what are some of those things? I mean, something that comes to my mind is go ahead and kind of brief yourself on different breastfeeding positions so that once your baby is here, you kind of have a toolbox to dig out of different ways you can hold your baby and different ways you can latch your baby. What else should we be kind of thinking about before our baby's on the outside?
Yeah, so the big fundamentals that I really focus on are teaching moms hand expression. Hand expression, if you're not familiar with that, is literally using your hands to express colostrum, which is your earliest milk. I encourage moms, as long as they're a low risk pregnancy and they're cleared for sex in the last weeks of your pregnancy, to learn and practice this. Like anything else, it's a learned skill, and everybody's body is a little bit different. So even if you're not, you may have seen people on social media collecting colostrum and bringing that to the hospital with them. Even if you're like, that seems stressful, I'm not interested in that. What I really want you to be able to do is just know how to do this. So, in that first hour after birth, if your baby is sleepy or you've had a C-section or your baby's having a low blood sugar, you have a tool right there to be able to get those first drops of colostrum out. And there's a wonderful website called firstdroplets.com you can look at, and they have great science statistics. But they did a study, and moms who hand expressed within the first hour after birth compared to several hours after birth. So within the first hour, those moms ended up with 130% more milk at 6 weeks because of the way your hormones go after birth, after you deliver your placenta, you have a huge shift in hormones. So in that first hour, the colostrum is easiest to express and it has the most impact on your milk supply long term. So if you can do that or you can teach your partner to do that, that really can be an absolute game changer for you.
That is huge. I mean, that's crazy. So, just to clarify, even if our baby is not latching in that first hour, we still want to be hand expressing and bringing out some of that colostrum, regardless of whether our baby is interested in eating or not.
Yes. So the way I explain it is, I never want to stress anybody out, but if you are able to regardless if baby latches or not, use your hand to get some extra drops of colostrum out. That is going to benefit your baby. So, what that can look like is maybe baby's latch to the left breast, and you can take your hand and express a little bit on the right into a spoon and just give that to baby after, like a little bit of dessert. It's not intended to be a large volume, but say this is what I often would see thousands of times. That baby is born and they're just not ready to latch yet in that first hour. They're sniffing around, they're licking, but they're not latching and removing milk. That's totally fine. But what I want you to do is remove that milk with your hand. That is what's going to signal to your body, okay, my baby's here. All right, girls, kick into gear. Let's start making milk. And that message within the first hour is really powerful for your body.
Now, I can hear some of my audience members chirping in my ear saying, what if I don't have milk at that time? Like, what if nothing comes out? Is that possible?
So, colostrum, I have seen that some moms' colostrum is a little bit harder to remove. Some moms certainly, just like milk supply, some moms have some that is very easy to come out. Whenever you're doing hand expression, one thing I want you to remember is you don't just like go in there and start cranking away. Like take a minute, have your baby skin to skin with you, massage your breast a little bit more. You need to raise that oxytocin level, like that love hormone, and then you can practice. Don't hurt yourself. Like if you're not seeing a drop, like take a break and go back later. But most of the time, more often than not, I do it with moms in pregnancy. They, in a prenatal visit, and they're not expecting to do anything, and we're on a Zoom call just like you and me are right now. I walk them through how to do it, and I literally watch them like tear up because they see that like first like pearl of colostrum come out, and it's just a really beautiful confidence builder too, that like your body, even though you weren't even aware of it, your body was getting ready. That being said, if you don't see colostrum, I also don't want you to fly off the handle and be like, I'm gonna have a low milk supply. That just means that your body is really sensitive to the hormones from your placenta that are just saying, not yet, girls, not yet. And that is not an indication of future low milk supply. I have a good friend who's a nurse in an IBCLC. She got nothing prenatally. She's breastfeeding her 18-month-old, her third child. Like, it does not mean anything. Some people are just, you don't see much until postpartum, and that's okay too, but it's still helpful to practice so you know how to do it.
Yeah, that is really helpful. For listeners, we have two episodes that are coming to mind. So, episode 240, we have an episode all about how to actually hand express, and then 356, which is about perceived low milk supply and why actually low milk supply is not as common as the internet would lead you to believe. So those two things are just kind of popping in my head. I wanted to drop those here. What would you say is like the hardest part of breastfeeding? And maybe there's two different answers. Maybe it's like there's the hardest part of getting going, and then there's a hardest part of maintaining it, or maybe it's just like one overall thing where you're like, no, this is the killer thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you adjusted earlier, moms don't have the kind of support that they need and deserve. A lot of times people are going into this incredibly complicated thing to learn with very little education before. You're
Mhm.
going to be sleep deprived and on a hormonal roller coaster, and you're going to be trying to learn a brand new thing. So that in and of itself is just a can be really challenging, and you need a lot of support around you because it can be really, really emotional. And for a lot of moms, it's the first time that maybe they've really met a challenge that they can't like think their way out of. And so I think there's a huge just emotional piece. I also think the way we teach latching in this country, the way we've probably all seen newborn latching being taught where moms, are sitting upright and they're holding baby and you're waiting for baby to have a big open mouth and kind of shoving them on the breast, that can actually make newborn latching a lot more difficult. And using more reclined positions where baby actually is able to use more of their like innate feeding reflexes can make a lot of things easier. So it's almost like breastfeeding with training wheels when moms are able to really recline and have baby latch that way. It allows baby to open wider, and a lot of the difficult things that moms find very frustrating with latching, where it's like that you feel like you need seven hands because baby's shoving their hand in their mouth while they, are shaking their head at your breast. It eliminates some of those behaviors. And so when I learned more about latching that way and switched my practice to teaching moms primarily about latching in these more baby-led positions, it really changed things for me because I was taught like every other nurse and new mom in an American hospital had to have 87 pillows around me and shove my breast in my baby's mouth. And learning latching in this kind of different way has made things a lot easier. And I've seen it make things a lot easier for a lot of the moms I work with.
So you're saying be sitting, let's call it in a bed, whether it's your bed at home or in a hospital bed. You're sitting on your butt. You're kind of reclined back. So you're from like your head down to your waist is at an angle. And what? We have our baby kind of in between our boobs, almost as if they just did the breast crawl, and we're letting them kind of find the boob on their own.
Yeah, so kind of a combination. I like to tell people like 9 months pregnant watching Netflix. So I want you to be really deeply reclined. You need to be reclined enough that baby's body is really glued to you by gravity. So if you lifted your hands up, baby's not going to slide off your chest.
Okay.
That's kind of a good cue. And that's actually something you can practice in pregnancy. So if you get like a 10-pound bag of rice, from the store. You can practice in your bed, on your couch, in your nursing chair. Like, okay, how deeply do I actually need to be reclining so this bag of rice baby isn't sliding? And that's how you'll know, okay, now I'm reclined deeply enough. And when I start people with this, I usually kind of tell them to position baby like a sash diagonally across your body. So they're really belly to belly with you, and their little legs are kind of froggied out and their arms are kind of coming up, kind of giving the breast a hug. And that gives them a lot of stability. So, really, when babies are given stability, just like with the breast crawl, that's when we see them being able to use these reflexes to feed. When they're in a more, upright position where, you're having to do all the work, they can't use their reflexes to help. And that's where we see a lot of this like frantic head bobbing and stuff that feels very challenging and overwhelming for new moms, where you feel like you need 87 hands to latch your baby. So reclined breastfeeding, does it work 100% of the time for 100% of the babies? No, but nothing does. That's why, exactly what you said, we need to have kind of a toolkit. So I basically think of reclined breastfeeding kind of that's like the training wheels, but you also have other things in your toolkit that you can pull from. But those same principles of like having baby have a lot of positional stability, having them lined up so they're reaching with their chin first, all of those essentials of latching apply to any of the positions. So it's kind of like once you get the essentials understood, you can kind of play with what works for you and your baby best.
Totally. It's like laying the foundation, and then you can be flexible in how you're able to accommodate like where you are and the time of day and your baby's growth and like what tools you have around you. That is awesome. I also imagine so my background for any new listeners who are just joining us today for the first time. Hi, welcome. I have a master's degree in human development and family studies. And so when I think about breastfeeding, I'm thinking about that human development piece. And one of the things that really stood out to me, gosh, in 2013 through 15, so we're talking 10 years ago, 13 years ago, um, was that we can actually create a resistance in our baby by shoving the boob in their mouth. Now, little did I know at that time that I was going to become a doula and I was going to be helping people, breastfeed and do lactation support and talk about lactation. I had no idea at that time, but it's something that I remember being like, wow, it's so weird that we can create this like aversion in babies because I think so many of us think that breastfeeding is just like so natural. It'll just like come natural to us. And while it is a natural way to feed your baby, it is not a natural skill. It's a very much a learned and practiced skill. I don't know that that's maybe not uniquely American. I think if we grew up in communities that routinely breastfed and we constantly saw women around us breastfeeding and from knee high, we always saw people breastfeeding, it probably would come a little bit more natural to us. But that is one thing that stuck with me. And it's just so ironic that now I'm in this field where I'm like always helping people breastfeed. And I always just remind them, like, we actually can create aversions in our babies. And this seems like such an easy way to avoid that because it's so what you referred to as baby led, which I love.
Yeah, it's really more, I don't want to say natural, but it takes into account what your baby brings to the table. Like it takes their skill set that they're born with, those reflexes, and allows them to use them. And and can make things just a lot simpler than what can feel like this complex uh, equation of perfect timing to get the baby on when their mouth is open the widest, and it can feel really aggressive. And I have found teaching people to latch this way, when they see it and they understand it, it just makes sense. And you realize that I think that some of the common breastfeeding positions that we teach now are really like bottle feeding positions. And so I think if we go back to like where we were at like cave times, you would give birth and you would be like in the comfiest corner of your cave with blankets around you, and you would be reclined and your baby would be draped across you, and you probably would have seen your mom and your aunt, your sisters, your cousins all latching that way, and that would have been what was in your mind. But right now when we think of breastfeeding, we think of a breastfeeding pill and a mom who's sitting upright, and certainly you're not doing reclined breastfeeding when you have an 18-month-old. At that point, you're, or a 6-month-old or a 6-week-old. Like you're not going to be latching this way forever. But if once you learn this way, most of the time, like when I talk to my sister and she's breastfeeding my 18-month-old, she's leaned back on her couch like that still, because you're supported then too. So a lot less neck, shoulder, chest pain, which if you treat postpartum moms, that is just killer, how tense you get from like staring down stressfully at your baby. So this just really takes the pressure off and can make latching also a lot less painful. They did a study in Italy where they taught moms 50%, they taught traditional latching, 50% they taught this baby led latching. And the moms who were taught this baby led latching ended up with a lot less nipple pain, soreness, breastfeeding complications. So it really can make a big difference.
For everybody, I mean, for baby and for mom. That's amazing. Okay, y'all, you know how we're always on the search for clean brands that are going to be transparent with the ingredients and the things that they put in their products? Well, I finally have found one, and I've been using their protein powder for the last 6, 7 months, and I have to say, I officially love them. I do. Just Ingredients is slowly becoming my go to place for so many things that I use in my daily life because I can see exactly what they put in their products. And there's no fillers, there's nothing, that we don't want, nothing undesirable, nothing that I can't pronounce. And I'm like, what is that? They have electrolytes. I mentioned the protein powders. They have magnesium. We know how important that is in pregnancy as well. Fish oil for people
who are trying to conceive, and they actually just launched pancake and muffin mix, which I'm going to snag in my next order. And I just ordered bone broth, but I haven't had a chance to try it. Super excited for that. They also have beauty products if you have been looking to switch to a clean and minimal brand. Not only do I love Just Ingredients because they're so transparent, but I love their commitment to using real ingredients and encouraging their consumers to become educated on optimal health and wellness, how they can support their bodies and their minds, and how do you actually understand the products that are in your life and where you might want to swap out different things. I'll never be a gatekeeping girly, and I will always test out products before I share them with you guys because I want to make sure that what I'm recommending is an honest recommendation and you can trust that it will be safe with you and your family. If you want to check out Just Ingredients, go to justingredients.us. So not .com, justingredients.us, and you can use the savings code Tranquility by HeHe, HeHe, Tranquility by HeHe, to save 10% off of your first order. Nothing makes me happier than to help you get healthier, and this is one of the brands that I love and trust, so I wanted to share it with you. All right, bye.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of colostrum expression. We've talked about the importance of having this like baby led, baby mother dynamic latching position. What are some other things that are so commonly overlooked in new moms?
I think there's a lot of pressure from, I'll put the blame on us, not us directly, but social media,
Sure.
with building a supply and having a stash and kind of this warped sense of milk supply. So I see moms really, really early in their postpartum journey, like wanting to save every drop and using a Haka every time or some sort of collector every time. And encouraging an oversupply, maybe not consciously, but if you're removing that milk, whether it's getting in a haka or a ladybug or an LV catch or whatever, your body thinks your baby ate that milk. So we really need to be using those things like very judiciously and not unintentionally really overstimulating our supplies. So I teach a lot about, what's normal with engorgement. So a lot of moms are on day 5 will have that's when they're having peak engorgement. That's where sometimes moms will complain like their breasts really hurt, they're very, very firm, and also babies having more difficulty latching. Because if you think about, a baby trying to latch to a really, really, really full water balloon, they're not going to be able to compress and pull that tissue into their mouth. And that's what can happen when a mom is very engorged. So, of course, you get discharged from the hospital, no longer is lactation there. You go home, engorgement hits, and your baby that was latching while in the hospital is now no longer latching. And shit feels like it's really hitting the fan. But there are things we can do. There are something called reverse pressure softening, which is literally just a finger placement on your areola, pushing back towards your chest wall to soften that tissue before baby latches. And that can allow them to really get a deep latch onto the breast. And also, you may have heard about like lymphatic breast massage for clogs. Same thing with engorgement. We want to help move that fluid out, do breast gymnastics, moving your breast up and around. All of that same thing can really help with um, preventing and dealing with that discomfort and also not making moms like, oh, I have to use the Haka before I put baby to the breast. That just gets us in a vicious cycle. So we want to try to avoid that if we can.
Nice. Okay, and what about pulling out milk often enough? So now we're going to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because if we don't pull enough milk out, and not necessarily enough in volume, but enough in frequency, then we
Yeah.
can also unintentionally harm our supply.
Yeah. So I think, newborns feed between 8 to 12 times a day, that's a lot, especially when you consider when we're timing feeds, it's from the beginning of one feed to the beginning of the next. So if your baby takes a half an hour to eat, that clock starts ticking at the beginning of that feed. So you may not, it's very intense, is what I'm trying to say in that newborn stage. But what especially in the first couple weeks, sometimes moms will have the opposite problem. They'll have a very sleepy newborn, especially if that baby has a little bit of jaundice, and they may not know, like, oh, until baby really is gaining weight consistently and is, proving that they're a competent breastfeeder, you do need to be waking baby up to feed, which is shocking and mind-blowing. And I know not what everybody wants to hear, but if you have one of those sleepy babies that, you swaddle and they're not going to wake up for 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours overnight, in the first weeks, like you cannot do that because you may really undermine your supply. Um, I see that. And then I also see as, the sleep training culture comes in, a lot of people will want to do these, like, feel pressure to do, like, make sure baby's getting full feeds and they're not snacking at the breast. If you can't see me, I'm using lots of air quotes. Um, and making sure your baby isn't just nursing out of habit or for comfort. Like, that's not a thing. Like, if your baby is seeming upset, like, you just offer the breast.
Mhm.
Like, I think we're very wrapped up in, making sure we don't have our babies bad habits, and that's just like not a thing. Especially in the first months of breastfeeding. You just breastfeed on demand, and if you have a sleepy newborn, you need to wake them up.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I do have a question where I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
Why are we starting a feed from the begin or starting that timer from the beginning of the feed? That is ludicrous to me because your baby is full at the end of that feed. So you can start that 90 to 120-minute timer from the end of the feed. So help me understand the rationale. Convince me
So
otherwise, Kelly.
I don't know who created that rationale, but
Yeah.
when we, as providers, pediatricians, lactation consultants, when we say feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours, we are not counting it from the end of the feeding.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who was the first person to decide that was correct, but you know, I think it is also like use your best judgment in
Yeah.
your unique situation. If you've been up for 72 hours and your mom is there for the next 4 hours and this is the one window you're going to get, and then it's you and your toddler and your newborn, go to sleep. Like, I think it's all about, I'm very much like there is nuance, and you also get to decide. There is no like morality with this. Like, I have a lot of complicated chronic health stuff. I had a lot of postpartum anxiety, and there are people, for whatever reasons that are none of my business, like they need to have sleep. And I, my job is to just have you know how your body works so you can decide if any of the possible trade-offs are worth it to you. And then if you decide that you need to have a 4 to 5 hour window at night because otherwise your, rheumatoid arthritis is going to flare, maybe that means your baby gets a bottle of formula. Like that is an okay choice to make. And so I think that's kind of the situation, especially if you're hearing me and you're like, I had a horrible postpartum experience last time. I had so much anxiety. Meet with a lactation consultant prenatally and really go through what happened last time, the health stuff that you have, any neurodivergence or sensory issues. Like, we can work with that if you have the right provider who really understands. Like, I am all for you doing what works for you and protects your physical and mental health because at the end of the day, like that's the most important thing for you and baby thriving. So when sleep is such a touchy subject because I know for myself, like I didn't co-sleep, my kids were in the other room. Like but I needed to do that because of my anxiety and my other chronic health stuff. And, we all have to make trade-offs and choices with parenting, and breastfeeding is one of those places.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Also, now that I'm thinking about it, if you time 2 hours from the end of the feed, you are still accomplishing that same thing. So let's say you start at 1, your baby takes 30 minutes to feed. You now time 2.5 hours from 1, so that puts you at 3:30. My way does it the same exact way. You feed from 1 to 1:30, you set a 2-hour timer, and you're still feeding at 3:30. So it's the
Yeah, you're
same
just
exact
stretching it a
thing.
little bit. I just never want parents, like, especially in the cluster feeding, what typically happens is you look at your clock, you set that timer, your baby wakes up before then. And I never want you, especially in that newborn stage, to be like, "Oh, I'm going to just try to hold him off because it hasn't been 2 hours yet." Like,
Mhm.
don't do that. Like, just feed your baby isn't manipulating you. Like, they do cluster a lot, especially in those early days in the evening time and during growth spurts. That's normal. If your baby is feeding every 45 minutes 24 hours a day, that's not normal, and you need to get that evaluated. But having a few hours during the day in the first few weeks where baby's cluster feeding a lot is really normal. I think sometimes, like, the more you just release into it and just find some really good show to binge watch and just let it happen and know it will pass is an easier way to cope with it.
I always say that cluster feeding is like carb loading for the night, right? Like you want your baby to be eating, they're going to be eating more frequent because they're trying to build up all their caloric intake for the overnight period where you want to sleep and so do they. You had said something earlier that made me think, if you're letting your newborn go 4 to 5 hours during the night, not only could that hurt your milk supply, but it may hurt your baby's weight gain. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to be said about your baby waking overnight in those first couple of weeks, especially the first 2 to 4 weeks. I mean, especially in the first 2 weeks, because we're trying to get them back to birth weight, right? So like newborn weight loss, very normal, very expected. We expect them to lose up to 10% of their birth weight. But we do want to see that trajectory, A, take an immediate upturn and for them to return to birth weight, if not super, super, super close by that 2 week mark. And, that's going to require those overnight wakings. And that's hard. I mean, it sucks to wake up at night. Look, I'm such a sleep princess. I get 8 hours of sleep on a regular night. A bad night is if I have to have like 7.5 hours of sleep. I'm like, that was a bad night. And a good night is like 10 hours of sleep. So, the newborn period is really hard because you are waking around the clock. You're touched out around the clock. You're really just like a feeding machine. And that can be really hard when you're in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really intense period, and you're having huge hormonal shifts in your own brain that,
Mm.
like, are happening. So finding like I think breastfeeding and postpartum are a time for like such self-tenderness and deep, deep like care for yourself. Like, you are a new baby. Like, that's really what and I felt that way after both of my births. Like, I just felt split wide open and like, who am I? It was such a very destabilizing and like beautiful experience, but you deserve so much tenderness. And so I'm all about just bringing that into your breastfeeding journey. And like, there is no perfect, like, in this experience. And it's all about like, just finding what feels good for you and your baby. And that's going to look different for everybody. And that's okay. Um, but I think my purpose is just for you to understand your body so you have agency to make these choices and know what's happening, so you
That's
feel
also
more in control.
that's also a really nasty part of social media is that it can make you feel like, well, if my experience doesn't look like her experience, then I must be doing it wrong. And if
Yeah.
my pump output doesn't look like her pump output, then I must have low supply. And if my baby isn't sleeping like her baby, then something must be wrong with my baby. And the truth of the matter is, we're human and we're all as individual as our fingerprints, right? And so I think understanding that now, something that has come to my mind as I say this is nursing second, third, fourth, fifth babies. Once you get the hang of it with one baby, there can be this false sense of like, all right, I did it. We did this one time. I'm a master, I'm a pro, and your second baby is born, and you're like, wait a minute, this is hella hard. This baby is really different than my first baby. My milk supply is really different. My boobs are even different. Talk to us about people who are maybe not on their first baby, but having subsequent children and finding themselves in a different situation than they were with their first and questioning, like, wow, was my first just a fluke? Or like, is this normal? Is something wrong? Did I lose my skill to breastfeed my babies? Hint, you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do forget the newborn stage. Like so we all have more children. Our body just has a little bit of amnesia about how intense that period is. So, working as a postpartum nurse and an IBCLC in the hospital, like I'd see a lot of moms, with a fresh newborn in their arms, and they're like, But I breastfed fed my toddler till he was 18 months old. Like, why is this feeling so hard?" And I'm like, well, your most recent memory is feeding a toddler. Like that's very different than feeding a newborn. And you sort of, I, I have a lot of people in my courses and stuff that are, will go back and review it and they're like, oh my God, I had forgotten a lot of this. And things change. Like our advice changes. Like we've just learned a lot of new information about flange fitting that I have moms who are coming back through boob school a second or third time and I'm like, make sure you look at that new pumping module because all this stuff is different than it was 3 years ago. So I think just making sure you're kind of getting a refresh because A, recommendations can change, and B, like you're going to forget a lot of the little newborn things. So just make sure you're brushing up on that before, even if it is your third. Yeah, and kids are humbling as F. Like, that's like just when you think you have anything down with any of them, they change. And when you are sure of the way you parent one kid, you certainly have another kid that demands something completely different from you. So, breastfeeding is another very humbling part of parenthood. But when you're in it, especially with your first, it's the totality of your parenting and
Mm.
it feels like so much pressure. And what I tell people is like breastfeeding is one way of loving your baby with your body. And there are millions and trillions of ways of loving your child with your body that you will do throughout your parenting journey. And like it feels like this is the only way in everything, but there's so just like you rock them at bed and you're gonna kiss their boo-boos and like it is one of many ways of loving your child with your body. And so don't let it consume you. And just really focusing on connection, I think is the biggest thing.
I love that. Oh my gosh, so sentimental. Um, what about bleeding, cracked nipples, nipple trauma? Talk us through some like basic tips. So for someone who realizes like, OMG, my nipple is kind of falling off my body here. What do we need to know about remedying that situation? And at some point, it's going to be like beyond what we can fix. So we should, kind of contact a lactation professional.
Yeah,
Where is that line in the sand?
we tell people no amount of pain is like normal. It's common. Where
Okay.
so most nipple soreness early on is related to a shallow latch. Most people are going to have a few shallow latches in there as they're learning and baby's sleepy, and even if you had a great latch in the beginning, you fall asleep, things happen. But if you're having any cracking, bleeding, that is definitely when you want to be finding a lactation consultant. And sometimes you may not have a lactation consultant around the corner. They can't see you right away. So I think we live in a world, there's a lot of great virtual care out there. But when we're seeing that, that's also sometimes where we'll want to obviously be evaluating the latch. We'll want to be treating whatever the nipple trauma is, looking at it and deciding how to treat it. And sometimes that also means taking a break from latching. So if you are in 10 out of 10 pain every time you latch your baby and you're bleeding and your nervous system is like flipping out, it's okay to take 24 hours and pace bottle feed your baby with a good bottle, have your partner learn how to do that in a side lying position, and you pump with a well fitted phalange and let your body and your nervous system catch its breath for a little while and then return to breastfeeding. I sometimes see moms that feel like, oh my God, but if we don't get latching down in the first week, then we're ruined. And it's just simply not true. Like you have time as long as you're feeding your baby and you're removing milk, you have time to work on the latch. And so I never want somebody to be, dreading every latch. They're in excruciating pain. Like I never want anybody to be at that point. Like, you should not be crying when you're latching your baby, period. And if you are, that's time where we need to really seriously be like, take a pause, pump for a little, like hand express. But there's no crying. I do not want that for anybody. So that's when taking a break can really be helpful.
Now, how do you feel about slash what's the data say about like certain healing tools? So Epsom salt soaks, and not for like mastitis or clogged ducts, but just like for simple healing, nipple balm, lanolin, silverette cups, things like that. The
Yeah.
tools that we have to help heal those sore and maybe cracked nipples.
Yeah, I really love Silverette cups.
Me
As long as I don't want your nipples to be like sitting in a puddle of milk all day long. So if you're leaking a lot, that's where you would just wanted to be making sure that you're taking the silverettes off. You're not having your nipples like be soaking in these milk all the time. But that's probably, I mean, that's something I tell everybody to get. I also love silverettes to bring to the hospital with you for you to express colostrum into, and then you feed the baby from the silverette. So I really do think like I'm not a person that tells you to get a lot of stuff, but I do feel like those are worth it. That's what I probably use as my like baseline treatment. If moms are continuing to have like a lot of damage, there are other things like hydrogel and polyfem and like different things that we can look at, but that's something that you'd want somebody to like evaluate the wound. But yeah, not Epsom salt soaks because Epsom salt soaks are going to be not the right pH. Some people will do just like almost normal saline soaks, and that's just an eighth of a teaspoon of table salt in a cup of warm water. And that's fine to soak your nipple in, and it can feel good, but we wouldn't want to do anything like Epsom salts.
And then lanolin, nipple butter, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are probably equivalent to using the silverettes. So I just sort of find what works better for that mom, what they like more. Lanolin, some people can have a little bit of an allergy because it kind of is made from wool. So I tend not to use that as much as probably I use a different nipple butter or something like that. Coconut oil or olive oil too can work really well, but silverettes are probably my go-to thing.
Nice. Okay, cool. My next question is about introducing a pump, which I feel like, again, social media has just tricked us into thinking we should introduce a pump. Like, all right, popped out a baby. Okay, introduce a pump. Day one, if I don't, my milk supply is going to be shot. I'm never going to be successfully breastfeeding my baby. This is just like so far from the truth. Help us understand in a normal and expected trajectory, not someone who has a NICU stay, not someone who had a very traumatic C-section, not someone who has a history of augmentation and came into it understanding that they may need some additional support. Nothing like that. I'm talking about a regular, straightforward delivery, epidural or not, but nothing special circumstances. What do we need to know about introducing a pump, particularly timing, and how often should we be using it during the day? Because I also think that a lot of people think, all right, I have to pump 5 times a day for 30 minutes each. And it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
we really need to just like pump the brakes here and let's think about things realistically and also like intentionally. What's our goal here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think I have two different answers. I think everybody should measure their nipples towards the end of pregnancy to get an idea of what their phalange is,
Okay.
because hospitals often do not have phalanges that go lower than a 21, and most moms are a 13 to a 17. So make
Mm.
it make sense. But if you are 15 millimeters, you are never going to blink your eyes and be a 24 millimeter. You're going to be around that size. You may shift a little up or down, but you're going to be smaller than this standard phalange. I always have people measure and purchase and bring the phalange with them to the hospital because you just never know what can happen. And you can have pretty significant damage from pumping with a too large phalange. So I'm just like, let's just make sure we got this figured out, throw it in your pump bag or in your hospital bag. But if you aren't needing to pump, meaning baby's latching well, they're peeing and pooping, weight loss and then weight gain is moving along as expected, then you do not need to pump. Hear my words. You do not need to pump. Starting at about 3 to 4 weeks, I suggest doing a daily bottle practice with baby. So that means just a half an ounce to an ounce of express breast milk that you put in a bottle that you give to baby. You can give it to baby and you get in the habit of doing that. If you're just giving that little snack bottle, it's not going to mess up your rhythm with them at the breast. Um, and that is for just practicing bottle skills because what I don't want is you're calling me panicked at 10 weeks postpartum because your baby took a bottle once at 4 weeks with grandma and you just never did it again until now. And you're going back to work in 2 weeks and you're sweating and so stressed because baby won't take a bottle. We do not want that. We want to make sure baby can happily take a bottle and have those bottle feeding skills. Um, but for that half an ounce, that's something where you could use a hand pump or you could use a haka. Um, but if I'm being very long-winded, you don't need to pump if you are going back to work at 12 weeks. About a month before you go back to work, I would start pumping once a day in the morning after the first morning feed, and start to collect that milk. That's kind of a very reasonable place to start. And our goal, you have to remember, is not to have way more milk than our baby needs. Our goal is to be where baby is with our milk supply, because if we encourage way more milk than what our baby needs, that comes with its own challenges as well.
So when you say measure your nipples at the end of pregnancy, can you define end of pregnancy? Are we talking 36 weeks, 38 weeks, as close to 40 weeks as possible,
I
or
think
what?
anywhere after 36 weeks is
Okay.
reasonable. They can swell a little bit postpartum, but again, I don't find that much of a change. And if I'm measuring, we measure you when you're a 12, we know if you need to pump, you certainly are going to need a different phalange than what is coming in your pump box. And so that gives us a good idea of where we need to start.
Yeah, cool. So, Kelly, I think that a lot of times breastfeeding can feel so daunting because it feels very lonesome. It feels like I'm the only one with working boobs. I'm the only one that has to like really get up at night and feed my baby. Maybe I'm the only one that can feed my baby if I've made the decision not to introduce bottles. What can partners do to be supportive if you have made the decision that we're only going to breastfeed. And so that's the primary way that your baby is eating. And a lot of it does fall on that mom.
Yeah, everything else.
Okay.
I think like just emptying the dishwasher, making sure mom has a drink within arm's reach, holding a sandwich up to her face, um, just the logistics. And if you have other children, obviously taking a bigger role in helping with other kids, washing pump parts, learning how to put the pump back together, all of the logistical stuff. But I also think just relaying your appreciation to your partner. Like, I remember being a new mom and crawling back in bed every night about after getting up and breastfeeding, and my husband would roll over and he would say, "I'm so proud of you. You're doing such a great job." And it really was amazing. Like, it really, really helped me, and it made me feel like this was a choice we were making as a family, and it made it feel a lot less lonely. So yeah, props to my husband. He's very good about that. But yeah, he that I'll never forget that. Like, it really made a difference for me.
Yeah, that is such a game changer just to have that deep gratitude and that recognition for all the hard work that your body is doing.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been so good. I have just one last question, and that is if you were to give parents one tip or one piece of advice throughout that first year to help get them through that first year, what would that be?
Oh, I would just say be easy on yourself and be kind to yourself. Like, you are just as tender as your new baby. And, I just see so many moms, myself included. I look back and I'm like, man, I was so hard on myself. And I wish I was just a little bit easier. And it's okay. I have a lot of advice you shouldn't have asked. It's also okay not to love every minute of it. I thought if I wasn't loving every minute that I was doing something wrong, and you're not. Some parts of parenting are a slog. Some parts of breastfeeding are a slog. So it's okay to, look at that and know there are hard parts and celebrate the parts that are blissful and know that just all of parenting is that way. The whole run of it is just a mix of the good and the bad.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love that so much. And it's a learning curve, you guys. You are learning your baby just as they are learning you, and you're learning how to be a new mom, and you're learning how to breastfeed, and your baby is learning how to be on the outside. Just grace, I think, is really the key component here. Grace for yourself, grace for the situation, grace for the thoughts that come into your head, grace for the mistakes that you make, grace for your baby and the things that they're learning every day, grace for your partner, just overall, like grace for everybody involved. I love that so much. Kelly, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really, really appreciate you. Now, if people wanted to learn from you, connect with you, share a story, hear your story deeper, how can they do all of that?
Yeah, so I am over on Instagram at the Balanced Boob, and you can find me over there. Also on my website, www.thebalancedboob.com. We have lots of blogs and freebies over there to help with latching or pumping or whatever you're going through. And then I teach a course called Boob School, which is for pregnant people and people in the thick of it that are trying to feel their way out of it or create a different breastfeeding experience the second or third or fourth time around. So I'm like you, I just love teaching. So I'm excited to be able to be here with you and share with your community.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're very, very grateful for you. And you shared such deep wisdom and just, I think, some educational tidbits that not a lot of people are really blessed to be able to hear in those first few weeks or even the first year that will really make it easier for you. All right, you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Remember, breastfeeding is a journey, it is a natural way to feed your baby, but it's a very learned skill. I will see you guys in the next episode. Be sure to follow Kelly on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.